Hey, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. This is part 2 of my Xbox One PS4 console launch retrospective series. So if you haven't watched part 1, maybe go back and give that a shot before this. But either way, I'm glad to have you because today we're talking about my favorite time of the year, E3. On June 10th, 2013 at 9:30 in the morning, Xbox holds their E3 press conference. And before anybody even comes out to the stage, we are treated to a lengthy gameplay demo for Metal Gear Solid 5. This is a great way to start the show because not only does it immediately feel like next gen, but also this is the first time that a Metal Gear game is launching onto Xbox. This is clearly something that Microsoft is proud of because the first people to come to the stage are Don Matrick and Hideo Kojima. Kojima basically just says, hey, Xbox is cool, and then leaves so that Don can give the proper preamble to the show. Don goes on to say that today is all about the games, before promising 13 next-gen Xbox exclusives. But before we can talk about next-gen, there's still some business with the 360 that we have to cover. And because it's not super relevant to the topic of this video, we're just going to go through it as fast as possible. Yusuf Mehdi comes out and he announces a new slim model of the 360. He also announces the beginning of the Games with Gold program, where Xbox Live users get free games every month, and then he lists off a couple of games that are still coming to the 360 for the rest of this year, including Grand Theft Auto 5 and Arkham Origins. Yusuf then shows off 3 trailers for previously unannounced 360 games, the first of which is World of Tanks. It's been on PC before this, but this is the first time that it's coming to a console. Then it's Max the Curse of Brotherhood, a game that seems like it has basically the same plot as the David Bowie movie Labyrinth. And actually, now that I think about it, Kojima was wearing a Bowie shirt when he came out earlier, as if to foreshadow this game that he probably didn't even know was in the showcase. And the last one is Dark Souls 2, which is great because not only is Dark Souls extremely popular at the time, but also it shows that Xbox is getting more support from Japan, which is something that they've always struggled with. With the 360 stuff out of the way, Phil Spencer comes out to talk about the future of Xbox, which is great because he's also the future of Xbox. He says that they're investing more in games than ever before, and that because of that there are more games in development than ever before. He then transitions directly into talking about the first 4 of those Xbox One exclusive games. The first is Rise Son of Rome, and it really shows off the power of the Xbox One by having visuals that are more impressive than about half of the games coming out now in 2020. Then they go to Killer Instinct, an extremely popular free-to-play fighting game, which has actually been back in the news recently because since EVO has to be online this year because of COVID, it's one of the only fighting games of this generation that had a netcode strong enough to hold up to the kind of stress they're going to put it through. After that, it's Sunset Overdrive, which is probably the last non-PlayStation exclusive game that Insomniac is ever going to make. And it's also one of my favorite Xbox One exclusive titles. And the last game of this chunk is Forza Motorsport 5. We've already seen it at the reveal event, but this time Dan Greenawalt comes out to talk about Drivatars. It's a feature of the game where it learns the way that you drive so that it can send out a bot version of you when you're not playing to race against your friends and earn rewards for you. It's an interesting idea, but a really stupid name. The next 4 games are introed by Phil Harrison. And if you don't know, Phil Harrison is cursed. At first he was great. He joined Sony in 1992, and he's actually the one who's credited with Sony getting a foothold in the UK, a place that they still dominate to this day. But that meant that he was at Sony during the launch of the PS3, which was probably the worst time in PlayStation history. After that, he left and went to Atari, and a couple years after he joined them, they filed for bankruptcy. Then he went to Gaikai, which if you don't remember from the first video, is a company that Sony bought and basically just killed off. Then at the time of this event, he's working at Microsoft, during the worst time of their history. And where does he work in 2020? Stadia. So either he's cursed, or he's some kind of video game Grim Reaper. Anyway, Harrison just talks some fluff before transitioning into a Minecraft trailer. It's just an announcement that Minecraft is going to live on into the next generation of consoles. And it's worth bearing in mind that this is actually a full year before Microsoft will buy Mojang for $2.5 billion. So it's interesting to see that even now there is some kind of partnership there. After that, it's the most underrated game of the generation, Quantum Break. They show off a cinematic trailer, and it's so early in development that instead of having Sean Ashmore as the main character, it's just some kind of Frank West look-alike. But even so, it does a good job of explaining what the game is going to be like. After Quantum Break is Dark Dreams Don't Die, or D4 for short. It's an episodic game from Swery that has a lot of the same vibes of Twin Peaks or Deadly Premonition. It was originally supposed to have 2 seasons, but Swery had a falling out with the company he was working for, so they only ever made 1. The last game of this chunk, and the 7th Xbox exclusive title, is Project Spark. It's less of a game and more of a game builder, similar to the more recent game Dreams. But mysteriously, even though Project Spark came out multiple years before Dreams, it's Dreams that gets all the credit for breaking the mold and being unique. As if people just completely forgot that Project Spark happened. Anyway, afterwards, Mark Whitten comes out to give one of only 2 segments of this entire show that is not directly related to a game. He's here to talk about Smart Glass, which he calls a second screen experience. The idea was that if you were playing a game on your Xbox, you could have your phone or your tablet out on the seat next to you, and you could use that to do things like look at a map or manage your inventory. The coolest use of this technology that I remember is in Fallout 4, where you could use your phone as like a Pip-Boy. Mark goes on to talk about a couple of updates and features, such as ditching Microsoft points in favor of real money, how easy it is to stream directly from your Xbox, and being able to share your Xbox Live benefits with any other profile on your Xbox, like a family sharing plan. And then, like the fills before him, he shows off 4 games. The first is Crimson Dragon. It's a sort of rail shooter where you fly on a dragon, but unfortunately, there's a problem with the trailer. No audio plays. When something like this goes wrong in an E3 conference, they call it a broken arrow, which I only bring up because it's gonna happen a couple more times. Anyway, afterwards they bring out 2 guys from Capcom Vancouver to give a gameplay demo for Dead Rising 3. And like a lot of the games up to this point, it's visually stunning. But beyond that, the number of zombies that they're able to show on screen at one time is extremely impressive, and something that really shows off the power of next gen. After Dead Rising is Witcher 3. And there's not a whole lot to say about it other than the fact that it's going to be one of the best games of the Xbox One generation. So instead we'll move on to the last game of this block and the second broken arrow of the night. Patrick Sutherland from EA comes out to show off a gameplay demo for Battlefield 4. And exactly like Crimson Dragon before it, no audio plays.
I guess you may see it later. We're continuing?
But after a really awkward minute, they restart the trailer, get the audio working, and it's another really stunning looking game. Once that demo is over, Phil Spencer comes back out to show off, you guessed it, even more games. He shows off a cute little indie game called Below, and a teaser for a game from their new studio, Black Tusk. If you don't recognize the name, it's because when Epic left to go make Fortnite, Black Tusk became the Coalition so that they could take over the Gears of War franchise. Which is also why this concept that they show off never ends up becoming a game. But the next game they show off is the highest profile game of the night, Halo 5. It's a teaser trailer of Master Chief in a desert. And if you were interested in games around the launch of the Xbox One, you probably saw this teaser about 100 times, because it's all that anybody wanted to talk about. After this teaser, Bonnie Ross from 343 comes out to talk up Halo for a while. And one of the things that she says is that Halo 5 is going to run at 60 frames a second, which I had to look up, but it actually does. This is especially impressive because recently PlayStation has come out and said that they're targeting 30 frames a second for all of their first-party titles on the PlayStation 5, a full generation after this. Afterwards, Phil Spencer comes out for the last time of the night to announce the release date of the Xbox One, as well as give a price point of $499 US before transitioning to Vince Zampella with Titanfall. This game looks like a ton of fun, and it's a great way for them to end this show. This has been an extremely good show. There was not only a lot of games, but an extremely diverse lineup of games. There were racing games, shooters, RPGs, fighting games, even a couple of really good-looking indies. And what's more, a handful of these games would go on to be some of the best games of this entire generation. Honestly, other than a couple of technical mishaps, in a vacuum, this conference is almost perfect. But the problem is that this conference does not exist in a vacuum. And once again, this entire event has gone by and they have done nothing to address the leaks. They don't talk about DRM, they don't talk about used games, they don't address any of the problems that people have with the Xbox One. And that's something that PlayStation would capitalize on. PlayStation held their E3 conference on the exact same day as Microsoft. But unlike Microsoft, they didn't start with a game. Instead, it starts with a 4-minute sizzle reel that's only interrupted when Jack Tretton finally comes out.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to E3 2013.
Anyway, Jack talks for another 6 minutes about kind of nothing. And by nothing, I mean the Vita. He gives some numbers and talks about a couple of things that are coming to it in the next year, but it just kind of comes off as him being like, no, really, people love the Vita. We're now 10 minutes into the showcase, and it's finally time to show off a game. And admittedly, it's a banger. They show off The Last of Us, which at the time of the presentation is coming out that same week. It's weird to consider that the game's not even out yet, because one of the first things that Jack says about it is that it's a Game of the Year contender. Which, he's not wrong, but it's just a little conceited for him to say. Jack then speedballs through a couple of other games coming to the PS3 over the next year. You see Puppeteer, Rain, Beyond Two Souls, Gran Turismo 6, Arkham Origins, and a bundle for Grand Theft Auto 5. And then 20 minutes into the show, it's finally time to actually talk about the PS4. To do this, Jack brings out Andrew House. House then introduces a video package where you can't even really see the PS4, and it just sort of hard cuts awkwardly to him holding the box on stage afterwards. And then, as if he doesn't know what to do with it, he brings out the designer of the PS4, who is basically just there to carry the thing off stage. And then, interestingly enough, Andrew House starts talking about media services, which is just a clever way of hiding the word TV. House brings out Michael Linton. Linton then goes on for about 10 minutes about Sony Pictures and TV and movies and music and Netflix, which leaves me extremely confused because just 2 weeks before this, Microsoft got absolutely destroyed for having talked about TV during their press event. So why is it okay now? Anyway, after the TV section is done, they bring out Shuhei Yoshida, who I'm convinced is just the nicest man in the world. He talks for a while about how they went and spoke to developers about what they wanted for the next-gen console, which is great. But then he also shows a picture of him just hanging out with games journalists, which seems like kind of a conflict of interest. But more importantly, now 34 minutes into the show, we finally get to see a next-gen game. Unfortunately, that game is The Order 1886. To be fair, the game is absolutely beautiful. It's just that there's not a whole lot of game to it, instead focusing almost entirely on cinematics and QuickTime events. But afterwards, they show off a bunch of the games that they already showed off at the PS4 reveal event. Killzone Shadowfall, Drive Club, Infamous Second Son, and Knack. But keeping in mind that the PS4 reveal event was several months before this, it's a good idea to remind people what games they can expect to play on the PS4. And I suppose the same reasoning is why immediately afterwards they show off another tech demo. The tech demo looks pretty good, but it's not any more impressive than the games that they just showed, so I'm not entirely sure what purpose it serves here. And after this, they bring out Adam Boyce to talk about indie games. Transistor from Supergiant Games gets a full trailer, but then afterwards, they do something really cool. Adam Boyce introduces 8 more indie games, and as he does, 8 separate screens on the stage light up showing a dev from each studio playing their game. I really love this. I think it's great to show that you are supporting these small independent studios. It's just a really good PR move, and some of these games are really cool. You've got Don't Starve, Octodad, Outlast, really immediately recognizable games, and this I think is the first place that we're seeing a lot of them. With the indie showcase done, they start showing off more AAA titles. You get a nice big trailer for Final Fantasy XV, a little teaser for Kingdom Hearts 3, a full gameplay demo for Assassin's Creed Black Flag, but unfortunately it's laggy and stuttery the whole time and eventually results in a broken arrow so bad that they just have to shut the whole thing down. Which they then follow up with another bullshot from Watch Dogs, a really creepy Uncanny Valley trailer for NBA 2K, a trailer for Elder Scrolls Online, and a cinematic trailer for Mad Max. And then it's time for Jack Tretton to come back out to the stage for the part of the show that people say killed Xbox. He starts by saying that the PS4 won't put any restrictions on used games or sharing games. Which sounds great, but in hindsight, we know that this wasn't actually PlayStation's intent. And we know this because when the PlayStation 4 launched, it came with a new terms of service that very clearly outlined that these things were not allowed. You must not resell either disk-based software or software downloads unless expressly authorized by us, and if the publisher is another company, additionally by that publisher. Or, all software is licensed, not sold, which means you acquire rights to use the software as described in these terms, but you do not acquire ownership of the software. If you do not comply with these terms, we can terminate your software license, which means that you will no longer have the right to use the software. What's more is they actually filed a patent that would put a chip on every PS4 disc that would recognize a certain PS4 and say, this is the only PS4 that this disc is able to be played on, ever. The patent says, when the game is to be played, the reproduction device conveys the disc ID and a player ID to the use permission tag. The use permission tag stores the terms of user of the game and determines whether a combination of the disc ID and the player ID conveyed from the reproduction device fulfills the terms of use or not. So if you're only getting a license and not actual ownership of the game, then that means you can't resell it. And if the disc specifically recognizes one player ID and can't be played by any other player, then that means you also can't share it. So Jack here is just kind of lying. And at the time, because people didn't know these things yet, the crowd is absolutely eating it up. To be clear, if I was in Jack's position, I would do the exact same thing. You don't watch a mistake like the one that Xbox made and just follow. But it does feel pretty unprofessional and a little bit scummy. And it definitely shines a different light on this video.
This is how you share your games on PS4.
Thanks.
Jack then goes on to say that PS4 will not require you to connect to the internet, and that PS Plus is going to start costing a monthly fee before transitioning into Destiny. It's a very long gameplay demo with some pretty cringy fake gamer talk.
Yeah, I got him. Oh, I do like the long rifle. What's its name?
Shut up and get behind me.
Eh. Hey, there she is.
Looks like you guys could use a Titan.
Absolutely.
So what are we doing? And can I use this?
And when it's over, Andrew House comes back out. He talks up Destiny for a minute before giving the price point of the PS4, which is $399, a full $100 less than the Xbox One. This to me is the real mic drop moment, because coming in at a full $100 less is massive. And this is how they close out their show. And to be honest, this show was pretty mediocre. I mean, don't get me wrong, they showed off a good number of cool games, and coming in with that lower price point is major. But the overwhelming majority of the games that they show off are ones that we've either already seen or they're indie games, which, while cool, aren't really a good reason to buy a $400 box. I mean, the best game that they show off during this conference is The Last of Us, and that's a PS3 title. This entire conference does very little to give you a reason to buy a PS4. And what's more is they still haven't told us what the specs of the PS4 are, which is especially weird when you consider that the launch PS4 is more powerful than the launch Xbox One. You would think that that would be something that they would want to focus in on instead of their games, which are undeniably lesser than the ones that Xbox showed. But none of that would end up really mattering because people were already so mad at Microsoft. They were mad about DRM. They were mad about used games. They were mad about TV. And PlayStation got really lucky because, as we've seen, they had a lot of the same ideas as Microsoft. But Microsoft stuff leaked first, which meant that they got to see the backlash of it and could just never mention that they had the same plan. I mean, yes, we can look back with hindsight and say, okay, well, they had a lot of the same plans. But because those plans didn't become known until the console was already out, it didn't matter. If Microsoft had come out of their E3 event and said, hey, all that stuff you hate, we hear you, we're removing it. Then when PlayStation came out at their event and said, yeah, we're not doing any of that either, it wouldn't have been a mic drop. It would have just been like a, well, good. But unfortunately, Microsoft didn't backtrack on these things until more than a week later on June 19th. And so because of that, the generation started with PlayStation having a massive lead. And when you add in the fact that Xbox doesn't sell in Japan and doesn't really sell in the UK, you wind up with a situation where worldwide PlayStation 4 has sold more than twice what the Xbox One has. Fortunately, in the time since, Microsoft has done a lot to come back from this. July 1st, 2014, Don Matrick, the guy responsible for all of these terrible decisions, left Microsoft. And in his place was put Phil Spencer. And Phil has done so much good. He's introduced services like xCloud and Game Pass and features like backwards compatibility and crossplay. And some of these things that he's implemented have actually become so deeply desired that PlayStation has been forced to follow suit. But PlayStation, on the other hand, while they haven't done these very pro-consumer things, what they've done instead is make outstanding games. Things like Spider-Man, God of War, huge critically acclaimed games, which has led to people saying, well, Xbox has no games. So up until recently, you wound up with a situation where Microsoft didn't have games, but they did have all these really pro-consumer things. Whereas PlayStation had really amazing games, but seemed to be in it for themselves. But in the last year or two, Xbox has answered their problems of not having games by more than doubling the number of studios that they have, to the point where they now have 15, which is the largest singular number of studios of any publisher. And PlayStation has started making more pro-consumer moves. They started talking about backwards compatibility. They allowed for crossplay to start being a thing. So now, in the modern day, in 2020, with the next generation of consoles right around the corner, it seems like it might be an even race. And now I don't know who's going to end up on top, but I'm super excited to see how it plays out. But anyway, that's the whole story. Do you agree or disagree with anything that I have to say, or do you just have an idea of how I can improve the channel? Let me know in the comments. And while you're down there, it would mean the world to me if you hit like or subscribe to the channel. And until next time, I'll see you around.